So I thought I would do a little video because 2020 is already a horror movie and Halloween is just over a month away. I thought there's a lot of noise out here. We have I think somebody's chopping a ton of wood, so I'm sorry if you guys, if that is messing with the audio a little bit. And I'm drinking a ginger beer. You guys have never tried the Fever Tree ginger beers? They're awesome. Non-alcoholic, real ginger, spicy. They're very good. So I thought I have a ghost story that I thought I would share. And I heard it when I was a kid, when I was little, and it happened to my family. It didn't happen to me, but it did happen to my grandmother, who told my brother and I this story. And to say it freaked us out would be a major understatement, especially when I think we were like in the 3rd and 4th grade. My brother and I are only about 18 months apart, so we're pretty close in age. And the story goes like this. Every summer, my brother and I would stay with my grandmother for a couple weeks on my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family. That is in Princeton, West Virginia on my mother's side, and Bluefield, West Virginia on my father's side. My father's side, Granny, Shockley, I never knew my grandfather. I know I met him, but I was really young, a baby, and he died in the hospital on the operating table with heart disease. He had a heart attack. So now that you know a little bit of the backstory here, we were staying with my grandmother Shockley that summer, and I remember asking Granny if ghosts were real, right? And the reason I asked this was because my grandparents, on the Kelly side, on my mom's side, they literally live right past their backyard is a gigantic cemetery. It's huge. In Princeton, West Virginia. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's that old cemetery that has those Gothic huge sculptures, gigantic. I mean, like life-size sculptures of like the Last Supper, just huge angels, just crazy stuff. And the bedroom that my brother and I would stay in was legit on the back of the house. If you looked out, and especially in the wintertime, you could see the grave markers in this cemetery. And at the time, we really didn't think anything about it because we were kids and it's just a cemetery. It's a really cool place to play because no one was around. So my brother and I and my cousin would go over there, and we had our little skateboards, or we'd just run around, fly kites because there were no trees really. And it was just this huge area. But when we started to hear, when you get to that age where ghost stories start happening, it started making that stay just a little bit more interesting, for lack of a better word. And my grandmother Shockley, Granny Shockley, was extremely religious. I think I mentioned this in one of my last videos. My dad was an ordained minister, Baptist. My grandfather was an ordained minister. Interesting point here. My grandfather's name, Shockley, was Merlin. Have you ever heard anyone outside of like the Arthur legends named Merlin? Right, that was my grandfather's name, Merlin Shockley. Anyway, he was an ordained minister. And I thought, if anybody's gonna tell us the truth as little kids and not sugarcoat it, it's gonna be my grandmother. She was extremely religious. She could quote the Bible forwards and backwards, went to church and took my brother and I literally in the morning on Sunday, in the afternoon, in the evenings. We did vacation Bible school. We went on Wednesday evenings. It was just like, that's what she did. She was very, very religious. And I remember her and my father, when we would visit, my brother and I would go out to play, and they'd be talking about scripture or something, and they'd be talking about stories in the Bible or whatever. And my brother and I would go out and play for a couple hours, come back, and they'd still be at it. So I thought, if anybody's going to tell us the truth, it's going to be my grandmother. So I remember asking her one night. We used to sit in the living room, the three of us, my brother, myself and my grandmother, and we would watch Nick at Night every night and have ice cream and watermelon and things like that. Excuse me. And I remember one night just asking Granny, Granny, are ghosts real? And what I was hoping for, because we were going to stay with my other grandparents, the Kellys, in a few days. We would usually divide up our time between the two sides of the family. And I was just wanting that, no, sweetheart, no sugar britches. That's what my grandmother used to call me. No sugar britches. Ghosts are not real. When you die, do you go to heaven or you go to hell? Whatever. But in short, what I was looking for was no, ghosts are not real. We did not get that answer. We got this story. It took me 5 minutes and 42 seconds to get here, but we got this story. Apparently, and this is how my grandmother tells it, the day my grandfather died, right, in the hospital on the operating table, everybody went home that evening. And that night, I think it was either that night or that morning, but very soon thereafter, the doorbell rang, right, on my grandmother's front porch. And then somebody knocked. So she'd had visitors all day long because, her neighbors were coming over and they were bringing casseroles and food. And she said that Connie and Novalee, her two neighbors, were constantly coming over and sitting with her and talking to her and stuff late into that night. So I think it was in the morning when the doorbell rang and and there was the knock. So my grandmother said this. So I answered the door, and it was Shockley. She used to call my grandfather by his last name, just Shockley. It was your grandfather. And he was just standing there, right? So, of course, my brother and I are sitting, I think we were sitting in the floor at the time, in the living room. I guarantee you we were both just, like, what? That's not the answer that you're supposed to give us. But she said, yeah, it was Shockley, and he was just standing there, and he smiled at me. And I asked him if he was okay. And he didn't nod, he didn't answer, he didn't say anything. He just disappeared. Right? He didn't, there wasn't that cliche, I could see through him, and he was floating, and he was ethereal, and he floated up to a light, or he just kind of just faded away. No, he just disappeared. But they stood eye to eye, facing one another, for a couple of minutes, the way my grandmother put it. And that was not the answer that my brother and I were looking for. There was no sleep to be had that night with my brother and I. And there's even, I have a ghost story from my mom when she grew up on the outside of that, on the border of that cemetery. But yeah, that was the first time I ever had like a real ghost story told to me. And it was the first time that somebody I trusted, that this is not going to lie to me. This isn't another kid around a campfire. This isn't summer camp ghost stories to scare each other. This was my grandmother, who would never, ever lie to me, who was sane and sharp and quick-witted until the day she died, telling me that our dead grandfather had rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. And the way she put it, she said he was just stopping by to make sure we were okay, so don't worry about it. And yeah, that was the first ghost story I ever heard. Well, like a legit ghost story. Not the story I wanted to hear. But yeah, so with Halloween coming up right around the corner, I figured, screw it, 2020 is already a horror story. And I don't think I've told too many people that story. I know Mary's heard it. But yeah, true story, and it was terrifying. It took a while to be able to sleep at night. Every sound was my grandfather shambling through the house, as a corpse. Every creak was him opening a door. Every time the wind blew past the house was him outside going, woo, just creepy. But yeah, that's my first ghost story. I only have a couple more that I know for sure happened, or that were told to me by my family members. But that's that was the first one that I think pretty sure that I ever heard for real, like legit. and it scared the crap out of me. So happy early Halloween, I guess.